questions in chat? Okay, so are you seeing my presentation?
We're seeing a web page, yes?
Yep, okay.
Yes.
All right, are we ready?
Yep.
All right. So hi, everybody. Thank you for having me all the way out here in Queensland. I'd like to start by paying my respects to the original custodians and continuing inhabitants of the land on which I live and work. Those are the Jagera and Turrbal people here in Meanjin, also known as Brisbane. And thank you all to the ACUADS conference. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce the acronym. I'm relatively new to Australia, but thank you for having me. So my talk is about using an example of mediated cultural heritage on the web, specifically an exhibit at the State Library of Queensland in 2019 and 2020, and how its online versions, especially in reaction to COVID, make it an interesting case study just to observe and analyze some fairly common elements in this remote mediation and representation of cultural heritage. So Spoken was an exhibit that launched in late 2019 at the State Library of Queensland and ran through part of 2020, and therefore was one of the many exhibits in Australia or around the world that fell prey to COVID. The library shut down and became a ghost building. And like everybody else, they were scrambling to think about how to put that exhibit online. And they chose, like many people, a virtual tour, which is to say a navigable, self-guided chain of 360-degree photographs of the exhibit proper that you could walk through by clicking from dot to dot and sort of take a look at the exhibit as it existed in physical reality. As well as this, the State Library also had already created a bunch of online materials or just organized materials that were already existing on their website in order to support this exhibition. The exhibition was about Indigenous Queensland languages, of which there are many, in various levels of current usage. The more north you go, the more conversational those languages still are, and the further south, the more they're only used in certain ritual circumstances, like called Welcome to Country. And so the exhibition already had a bunch of materials about language. They're deeply engaged and make very sincere efforts to support the reinvigoration of Queensland languages. And so this struck me as somebody who has been in work in various relationships with the State Library for the past few years as an interesting example to think about how these two different kinds of mediation worked and what they might mean that the web is good for in terms of the design of mediated experiences. So we're actually talking about three different kinds of mediated experiences, I should say up front. One is the physical exhibition itself, which is mediating Queensland languages in a particular way and in a particular narrative for a physical audience. One is the virtual tour, which tries to mediate, just take that thing and put it online and represent what the physical experience was like for people who, in my case, were also there, but also people who just couldn't have seen it. And then there is the mediation of the same cultural materials, for instance, books that exist in the library's collections, but that are not framed as an exhibition or not curated into a particular spatial arrangement with each other in the way that we think of curation. So I'm just going to sort of speed through this in order to talk about the different affordances, and by affordances I mean the possibilities and the expectations of in-person exhibitions and online interfaces. The way that I've made this presentation, it is online, and I've included a lot of verbiage on the screen in hopes, or just in case people would like to refer to it later. You're welcome to follow my train of thought. I'm not going to read every single slide here. You're welcome. But I do just want to sort of nail down these ideas. So one thing an in-person exhibition does, and possibly the most important thing, is to retain and show the affect of historical objects. In this case, I'm thinking specifically of historical exhibitions. Just being present in the room with an object that has been present with other humans for hundreds or thousands of years is an experience that other forms of mediation, whether it's a photograph in a book or on the web, by definition cannot reproduce. So my quote there is from the extremely talented writer Lauren Berlant, our endurance in the object, not just the endurance of the object in a sort of Walter Benjamin aura kind of way, but the way that we endure in the object, both individually and as a people. Gravitas, well, one thing that in-person exhibitions do is they get all the fancy words. The fact is that in-person exhibitions just have more cultural weight than a website. One thing that Spoken did was to take not Indigenous culture, not just as subject matter, but Indigenous people as participants and as co-creators of those materials and of the exhibition, and insert them into an institutional space where not all that long ago, they could never have been as authors and have agency. And that's that presence, that representation just of actual people in cultural spaces is very important. And making a website really doesn't have that same weight just because the buildings have existed longer. And from a design point of view, and I am a teacher of design, the other thing that exhibitions have is the familiarity in the sense that most people who go to galleries have been to galleries before and they know how galleries work. They know where to walk, they know how to look at things, they know what to touch or not to touch usually, although this can be a problem for some exhibits. And so there's a kind of ease of familiarity that can just guide people through directly to the content without the experience itself getting in the way. Now, the danger sometimes can be, as museums and libraries try to broaden the reach and broaden their responsibility to various publics, including previously marginalized peoples, the problem can be that that familiarity gets in the way of new and different kinds of cultural experiences. On the other hand, what do online interfaces do? Well, one, and this is something that librarians and museums and basically everybody talks about a lot, is access. In theory, everybody can access the web. This is true depending on what your wireless connection is like. Far Queensland sometimes has trouble accessing the library's various programs. But in theory, if I have a phone, I can look at whatever the library has going on. So if something is on the website, I can access it. What this means is that the inaccessibility on the web consists not of it's an object that happens not to be in front of me, but it consists of not knowing it's there. Awareness as well as accessibility becomes an issue. And this quote at the bottom is from Robin Hamilton, who, when I first started working with the library in 2019, she happened to say this, and I've been thinking about it probably once a week ever since. The collection is as accessible as the way that we describe it. If the library, this happens physically and on the line to the library all the time. People just don't know what's there. So you walk up and you think, I'm prepared to see something interesting, but I don't know what to look for until that I know that it's there, so I know how to look for it. So what do I do? And so that problem of accessibility is really one of an opaque threshold on the website. Like, how do you know what's interesting there unless somebody is there to guide you? In other words, the sheer massive of data on the internet sometimes gets in the way. Flexibility is another, as all of these things are, both strength and weakness. Any website can be structured very differently, and we don't have the same history and the same conventions as in physical curation. So I could do whatever I want. Like, this interface could be radically different from that interface. That brings up a lot of logistical problems on the design side for the library, like who is actually going to be designing all of these different neat interfaces? How are they going to have expertise in that? But it also puts a considerable draw on the generosity of the visitor to say, okay, I'm prepared to learn how to use this brand new interface again, now that I'm looking at this new website, which works a little differently than the old website. In gallery design, again, they're largely designed to be large, mostly empty rooms, but also we are familiar enough with the expectations and how these things work that the flexibility is also somewhat expected. We know what kind of flexibility works in an actual gallery. But the big thing from the public perspective about the internet, and again, this is sort of variably true, is that it's persistent. Spoken was installed for, State Library has a very long exhibition calendar. It was installed for probably 4 to 6 months, but the website is still there, almost 3 years later. And in theory, if no terrible apocalypse happens to our information infrastructure, it will always be there. So while the objects themselves persist physically, they're still in the library's collection, they're back in the stacks where they have sort of vanished from the public's perception, where the website and the various ways that it's reproduced there can still exist for quite a long time. So while I started out and I'm going to continue thinking about the virtual tour and the supporting materials, in order to talk about the virtual tour, I think we need to talk a little bit about the physical exhibition and the fact that it's a physical exhibition about language. And specifically, it's about languages that for well-known and terrible reasons, quite a lot of those languages don't have any even audible or in some cases written traces. And so what we see in this photo on the left is that people are engaging with Indigenous languages, with the native languages of Queensland, in kind of the way that one always engages with a gallery. You stand around and look at things. And I will say that again, for excellent reasons, there was very little audible language, that is Indigenous language, in the exhibition. What it mostly was not necessarily an exhibition of language, but an exhibition around language, an exhibition framing the history and importance of Indigenous languages. And that includes, as you can see here, a woman listening to one of many videos in the show of Indigenous people talking about language and what it means to them and how they experience it in their lives. And what we see on the right rather, is the virtual tour itself. Now I'm going to run the risk of breaking everything and click on this briefly. Let me know if you can still see this. Can you still see it? Are you seeing Begin the Virtual Tour, that website? Anybody out there?
We are.
Okay,
We're seeing the front end of the website.
Okay. So I'm just going to begin this and move through it quite quickly to show that the physical website, or sorry, the physical exhibit was quite ambitious and quite well done. I want to stress that I'm not critiquing either the website or the exhibition, but showing that using this as a chance to comment on and hopefully analyze, time permitting, some features of online representation. So as we maybe all experienced if we were bored during lockdown and tried to look at virtual tours of exhibitions, this is a technologically nifty representation of a physical experience that it does not really replicate. It's somewhat frustrating if I try to act with it in the way that I would act with the exhibition. And I want to suggest at this point, and I'll get to this a bit later as well, that curation in this sense, exhibition design, consists of arranging bodies in space, and some of those bodies are the visitors who see the exhibition, arranging bodies in space in order to tell stories or allow stories to be told using certain cultural materials, whether those are objects or immaterial. So I can look at, for instance, James Cook's ship's log, and then I can read about it, but I can't look at it and read it at the same time in this particular interface. So physically, the designed experience is that, you know, I'm flicking my eyes back and forth here, perhaps, to look first at the book and then at the text. It feels like a single gesture, and then I might choose to, for instance, go a little closer and like really look at that handwriting, let's say, and marvel at how people used to write back then. Sorry, let me just check. Is there something in chat? I'm trying to double time this. Anyway, so that's a single gesture that can't be replicated, and that in fact is denied me by the sense that my physical relationship, that is my bodily relationship to the book, remains the same. Not only can I not change my visual representation of the book by zooming into this image, I can't literally get closer to it. And that is something that I want to stress about all web-based and screen-based interactions, the physical nature of the interaction that they imply. So this is a sort of heroic attempt to reproduce and represent an excellent show. But it is perhaps not the best way to experience the particular and specific objects that are in the show. If we go back to the presentation, there we are. Yep. So my 2 points, as I've just said, are first off, curation means telling stories by arranging bodies in space. And you can see here on the left, those bodies, the people are doing very traditional gallery things. This exhibition was very consciously and very strategically designed to look like a high-end traditional exhibition. I also want to say that all interactions, rather than dividing interactions into physical and virtual, I want to say that all interactions, as well as virtual interactions, are physical, or at least have a physical component. This photo on the right is of the info zone, which is where in the State Library, visitors can use computers to their heart's content. And these people are, for some reason, willingly sitting on the floor to use computers. This apparently is quite popular at the library. And that's what makes us all individual people, I guess. So but there is, in other words, even if I'm just staring into a screen, that screen is in a place. It's a certain amount of distance from my eyes. I'm either holding it or looking at it. Mine is on a slight riser now, so that I'm not sort of peering down at you like this. All of these things are physical interactions that might be quite boring, but they're still interactions. And the way that this extends into the virtual is also spatial. We used to, the web starting in the 90s started out using a weird hash of terms borrowed from graphic design, like index page and web page, and terms borrowed from architecture, like sitemap, or just the fact of navigating a website. What's the navigation here? And over time, some of the terms involved there, like site architect and cyberspace, have come to seem kind of retro and boring, or even embarrassing. So we use cool things like UX design and UI design, and you can tell they're cool because they have acronyms in them. And there's an X. That's pretty great. But still, there is a spatial element that sometimes goes unaddressed. Not spatial in the sense of reproducing 3D experiences within the screen, but spatial in the sense of the way that information or cultural materials are arranged. This, for instance, is a sitemap of the State Library of Queensland's website. Of course, it's not actually a map, it's a table of contents, but it is the arrangement, it's a visualization of the arrangement in a kind of notional space of the way the website is structured as a kind of branching organism that extends the library's presence into, hopefully, the rest of Queensland and of Australia and potentially the world. So if we start to think about online space as space and as spatial, can we start to think of it as having certain specific kinds of affect? For instance, I think I'm going to have to move back a little bit. This woman is listening to headphones within the physical exhibition. This video here is a video of a welcoming ceremony, and is the only environmental sound, the only sound that's being played through speakers in the entire exhibit. It's also the only sound that's represented in the virtual tour, and that makes a very interesting difference. In the physical exhibition, it's playing as you come in. It is literally the first thing you see, and it's welcoming you as you walk into it. So it's observing both an exhibition function and its ritual function in welcoming you to this particular piece of Turrbal and Jaguar country. In the virtual tour, it is playing, but it's playing at the same volume throughout your tour. It's on a loop. It's never not playing as you're seeing the virtual tour, unless you turn off the volume, as I tend to do now. And it is, in other words, non-directional. It is completely It exists entirely within my headphones or my speakers or those other speakers over there. It is unhooked from the spatial, but resumes another spatial relationship, one of the enforced intimacy of headphones or of individual experience. And so what online experiences play to this? The fact that the website is about, or the exhibition is about language, makes for some very interesting possibilities around what the web materials could have done to curate a virtual experience of a virtual experience of language materials. There are links to the website, in other words, is treated like an information resource rather than an exhibition venue. There are links to the objects that exist in the library's catalog. There are lists of words in various languages gleaned from various sources, both living peoples and archival. There are some videos, but they're not arranged in the careful experiential way that the physical exhibition is. And so my conclusion, is that there are two different kinds of affect, and each experience that we design or interface that we create, physical interface or virtual interface, uses those twin affects. And I want to address that by thinking about Walter Benjamin's famous term, the aura, very quickly at the end of my talk. For Benjamin, the aura of a historical object, of an art artifact, came from its uniqueness and its stability. It and only it has been itself for all of the time that it's existed. The Mona Lisa has, it was there when Da Vinci painted it, he touched it, and now I am in the same space as it if I go to the Louvre. Leonardo and I are sharing the same space in some way. It's like a kind of vicarious time travel. And so that historical affect, as Husing says, is the aura of physical objects. Now, the aura of digital objects is a little different. In fact, it comes from a completely opposite place, where the aura of a cultural object, physical object, comes from its physical uniqueness. The aura of a digital object, as we can call it, comes from its ubiquity. And in this, it has a lot more in common with information, intellectual property and law, or intangible heritage like language. The more something is seen, the more something is used, the more valuable it is, and the more presence it has in my understanding of the world. So my physical relationship to the Mona Lisa is very different. I can become very close to the visual image. I can stare into my phone looking at Mona Lisa's left eyebrow, and you can, see videos teaching you how special her eyebrows really are because they're not there. And so forth.
Can we
yep.
might have to stop you there, Seth. You're about quite a few minutes over. Has anyone got one quick question?
Sorry.
That's okay. No, thank you so much. That was fascinating. We're going to have some time for networking after the wrap-up session, so people might want to chat to you about that. I'll certainly be visiting that website. And thanks to all the speakers in the session. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm sorry again that I was late.